What if I put a Stargate on your home planet and put the other one in the core of a star?
Oh my God. Oh, I mean, that's not even war anymore. That's just actually playing God.
Hello and welcome to Entropy Rising, where we talk about science and futurism. I'm your host, Jacob, and as always, I am joined by my wonderful co-host, Lucas. Lucas, how are you doing today?
Jake, I'm doing good. It's always a pleasure.
I'm glad to hear it, and I'm always happy to be here and recording. You know, it's always a good day for me when we're recording.
Yes, sir.
So today we are diving into the topic of faster than light travel, which has been the topic of many science fiction books, movies, TV shows, whatever. It's one of the most popular concepts in science fiction, to the point that I think it's almost synonymous with science fiction.
Yeah, it is definitely an interesting topic. You see it everywhere, although everything that has to do with physics that we know so far makes it seem like faster than light travel would not be possible. And by all accounts, I don't think that it ever will be. But there's a lot of stuff out there that we don't know yet. So it is really fun to dive into the idea of faster than light travel and what that would mean for us as a civilization.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. We're going to have a discussion about it. And a lot of our discussion is going to be based on an assumption that it is possible. But I do think it's worth addressing the elephant in the room. All modern physics basically says faster than light travel is impossible.
Yeah.
And there's no reason to assume that's wrong. And of course, we could discover some new form of physics, some new thing, and that could change it. But there's really no evidence or reason to assume that's going to happen. Of course, we don't know everything, and things could change. But, you know, generally on this show, all of our past episodes and many of our future episodes are going to be based on the assumption that FTL is impossible. And I think that's a good assumption to make, especially when talking about the future, because you don't want to talk about future possibilities based on something you think is impossible being possible. I think it's better to dream about a future that we know is possible from modern physics.
Absolutely. I mean, that just gives you the most efficient planning and creation of these ideas, because if everything is based off of speculation, then we really wouldn't be nearly as far as we are right now.
Exactly. But with that being said, it is fun to speculate. And so for this episode, we're going to speculate about the possibility of FTL. We're going to address some of the physics, some of the different drives that exist that we see in science fiction, and even some of the drives that have a little bit more merit in actual science. And then we're going to go on to talk about how would this change our picture of humans colonizing space if we do have FTL, and how would that change depending on the type of FTL we have? Because there's a big difference between being able to go 1 or 2 times the speed of light and having instantaneous FTL portals like you see in Stargate.
Yeah, I mean, that would be incredible. Imagine your commute.
Yeah, that'd be great. Somehow where we live, they would still find a way to have traffic. But
Right, just got to get in line.
yeah, so we are going to be having a very science fiction discussion today. We'll still be bringing in plenty of real physics, especially for the earlier part of it, where we're talking about how these FTL drives are proposed to work. And then we'll go on to have some more discussion about how this would affect society.
Yeah, sounds great.
So I think first, though, maybe we should talk about a little bit of physics behind why we can't go faster than light.
Yeah, I'm sure that a lot of our viewers know this already, but essentially to excel anything that has mass up to the speed of light, you would need an infinite amount of energy.
Infinite energy as you approach the speed of light. And then to cross the speed of light, you actually need more than an infinite amount of energy, which is a nonsensical term. And then, you know, we also talk about how you have time dilation as you reach the speed of light. And then as you hit the speed of light and then cross over, you experience 0 time and then negative time, which is one of the reasons we say that FTL is a time machine. There are other reasons that faster than light travel is a time machine. Even some of these faster than light devices we're going to talk about today that don't outright experience time dilation can still be used to travel in time. So we'll still be talking about some of that. And not to mention, our universe is just set up to make FTL work like a time machine because we experience time dilation. We have people who are in different reference frames. Depending on your velocity relative to someone else, you experience time differently. And the drawback of that is that if you are moving near the speed of light and you send me a message, from my perspective, it'll look like that message traveled back in time. And I'll actually get that message before you sent it.
Yeah, which is just crazy to think about, right?
Yeah.
Going into like time paradoxes, essentially. And then it's if you had sent the message, but you received it before you even sent it, then did you actually send the message, and where did it come from? And is it...
Especially if I send myself a message to not send the message, or you send me a message saying, hey, don't send me a message. So there are a lot of issues. And if we wanted to have a universe that allowed FTL, One of the things that would need to happen is that we would need to have a fixed reference frame for time. We wouldn't have any of these time travel paradoxes with FTL if we all experience time the same, but we don't. Our universe has relativistic effects with time, and a consequence of that is that it appears that FTL is impossible without also having time travel.
Yeah, which comes with a whole slew of other issues, which just makes you think about physics having these barriers set that keep this from happening, essentially.
That's definitely a drawback to FTL, and one of the reasons I think it can't exist. However, again, for this episode, we're going to be talking a little bit more about different types of drives, so I think it'd be fun to dive into some of the FTL drives we've seen. What do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think one of the most famous ones, right, is probably the warp drive from Star Trek.
Yeah.
Because that one actually has a real world counterpart too, the Alcubierre drive.
Yeah, the warp drive from Star Trek is definitely an interesting concept. It just works by condensing space-time in front of you and then expanding it behind you, propelling you forward in a chronologically safe bubble.
Yeah, you're actually in an area of flat space-time, so you're not experiencing any relativistic effects. It does have some issues. One of the issues we're going to see with a lot of these different types of faster than light drives is that you need exotic matter that has a negative mass or a negative energy density to make it work. And as far as we know, that doesn't exist.
Right. Well, but it is speculated to exist, right?
No.
No?
It's quite the opposite. Most physicists believe it doesn't exist because it has a lot of weird properties if it does. One is that it enables you to make perpetual motion machines because negative matter repels positive matter, regular matter, but regular matter still attracts negative matter to it. So if you put a piece of negative matter next to a piece of real matter, the real matter will attract the negative matter to it. So the negative matter will fall toward the regular matter, but the regular matter will be repelled by the negative matter. And you end up with a situation where the positive matter is chased by the negative matter and it will accelerate up into the speed of light.
Yeah, it would be sort of like having magnets that both attract and repel each other at the same time.
I know there's always the meme of like someone standing holding a magnet up with another magnet in front of them, and that's really how negative matter would work, and it would let you violate a lot of these conservation principles that we believe are going to hold true in the universe. And it would also let you create something called like a bias drive, which is essentially a ship that just has negative matter and real matter, and it uses that to propel itself up to near light speed.
But not up to light speed?
Yeah, you still couldn't go faster than light, even with this drive.
Okay.
But you would be able to get infinitely close to the speed of light. So if you did have negative matter, you can violate one of the fundamental laws of thermodynamics, which is that energy cannot be created nor destroyed. So if negative matter did exist, it would violate that law. That's one of the biggest speculations as to why it can't exist.
Yeah. Because if you could do that, then, I mean, we'd have a lot more stuff to talk about other than just faster than light. We would have infinite energy.
Yeah, that is one of the huge implications of negative matter existing. I've seen so many science fiction books that'll have warp drives or even mention that negative matter is used. And then they like go on to not talk about the wider society implications of this.
Like this technology that you have here is life-changing in so many ways.
It also gives you anti-gravity tech because you can put some negative matter and matter next to it and float buildings and stuff like that if you wanted to repel against gravity. So any book that tries to say that they have negative matter and then doesn't then talk about all these massive floating skyscrapers and infinite amount of energy they're generating is not looking at the bigger picture.
Yeah, see.
Which is why I tend to favor when stories don't explain how their FTL works. They just say, oh, we've got FTL.
Yeah, no, I mean, it lets you just sort of your imagination run wild with how that works, or just not care about it if that's your vibe also.
Yeah, the negative matter is one of the biggest drawbacks to the Alcubierre drive, the warp drive. And this is also one of the reasons that we can't have wormholes. Wormholes would also require negative matter to remain open and to remain steady.
Now, what if you had a wormhole that didn't take you to a different spot in your universe, but to a different spot in another universe?
That does get around the time travel issues, but you would still need negative matter to hold it steady.
Okay.
And the only thing that can do that is something with a negative energy density, which is negative matter. And for the later discussions, we'll definitely talk about what happens if you do have a wormhole. But when we're just talking about the physics of it and why a lot of physicists tend to believe that wormholes aren't possible, it's because of this requirement for negative matter.
I see.
Which this negative matter requirement is one of the many reasons also people believe that the Alcubierre drive is probably not possible. Though the Alcubierre drive does have some other interesting problems that make it impossible as well.
So it really just seems if we could find negative matter, then time travel would be possible in a lot of different senses, using wormholes, bending space-time.
Yeah, essentially. And we have this idea of causality
Right.
in our universe, which is that cause should always happen before effect. Because if you do have causality preserved, which means that there's no way to break it, you don't get any time travel paradoxes. It's probably true that causality will hold true and it can't be broken, but we don't really have any way to know that's the case. We just always assume that's the case.
Yeah. I mean, it's because we've had nothing that has shown otherwise.
Yeah.
And if it has, then it's something that we are unable to detect or even are influenced by.
Yeah. It's probably a safe bet that in our universe, cause will always precede effect and you can't have any time travel paradoxes. But again, that's an observation that we've made and an assumption we use for our models of the universe. It's not necessarily a law or something that we can prove to be true, right?
Yeah, it simply just is.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe, who knows? Maybe time travel is possible and you can get these weird paradoxes, and who knows what happens if that happens. Maybe the whole universe just blinks out of existence.
Yeah, that is very true. So with all that being said, all of this being or seeming impossible, and talking about causality, let's just try to put that to the side and get into a world of hypothetical.
Okay.
If we were able to achieve faster than light travel, what would that mean for us as a civilization?
Yeah, there's a lot of implications if you actually did have faster than light travel. And of course, these different scenarios we're going to talk about are going to vary wildly depending on what type of faster than light travel you have, how expensive that travel is, and how fast it truly is.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're able to go, for example, 100 times the speed of light, that's very fast. But remember, that still means it's going to take 1,000 years to travel from one side of our galaxy to the other.
Yeah.
I mean, that still opens up a huge amount of space that you can travel to very quickly. But even at 1,000 times the speed of light, you can't just go anywhere. And you might not even have faster than light travel that's that fast. You could imagine situations where you have 2 times light speed, 5 times light speed, 10 times light speed. And under all these different circumstances, that's going to open up a variety of different worlds you can colonize. And it'll probably change how picky you are about where you end up colonizing and where you end up calling home.
That is an interesting point, the pickiness, because when the world or not the world, but when the galaxy opens up to you like that, what do? How do you perceive these other masses of land or these other achievable things? Do you now start purchasing like cruise tickets to go and see nebulas and things like that just because you can?
And that's going to depend wildly, like I said, on how cheap your FTL is and how fast it is. Because you might have a situation where FTL is extremely expensive, maybe. And if that's the case, you won't be buying cruises to nebulas, but also when you're talking about colonization targets, you might choose to colonize a less hospitable planet that's closer versus a more hospitable planet that's farther away just because of the sheer energy demands. Or you might end up with a situation where you send out a bunch of probes that are slower than light in all directions to go look at all of the different stars that are nearby and to report back, and you take your time and you only send out an FTL ship when you find the perfect planet because it's just so expensive. You can't afford to FTL travel to every single planet. All the way to the opposite extreme of FTL being extremely cheap and fast. You might just go to every single star system around you, survey it, and then only send colonists to the top of the top worlds, the worlds that are almost like 99% as good as Earth, because you have FTL that's so fast and it's so cheap. Why would you bother with anything that's not ideal? And if there's no planets within 100 light years that are ideal, you'll go to 1,000 light years.
Mm-hmm.
So, that pickiness is going to vary wildly depending on how efficient your FTL is, how fast it is, and how cheap it is.
I absolutely agree. Now, if we're thinking of FTL as a new technology that humanity is coming into, it'll act as any other technology has in the past. It'll start off expensive and slow and not optimized. So thinking about sending probes out, it would almost be like us launching rockets into space now. We do a lot of planning and calculations, and we are only sending 3 guys and like enough dehydrated food to make them survive for a couple months on the ISS or wherever they're going. So getting the opportunity to do faster than light travel and go to a different planet, it probably wouldn't be the best starting off.
Yeah, I could see that, where when FTL is first discovered, it might be expensive, it might be rare. And maybe it is the case that the first worlds that we settle, even in an FTL scenario, are the less ideal ones, like you said. And then maybe it'll be the case that further on down the road, as the technology develops and matures and becomes cheaper, subsequent colonies are more ideal for humanity because you can afford to be a little pickier.
Yeah. Being able to go over to the other side of the Milky Way in an instant, you've created this huge, unimaginable amount of space, and you've turned it into what just seems like an acre of land on our planet. You can just go to a different town and buy an acre of land there like you would in Nebraska, except now it's on a star that is an unimaginable distance from where you started.
You know what it kind of reminds me of a little bit? Urban sprawl here in the United States that we run into, where before the automobile especially, you needed to live where the jobs were. You lived in a town. But once we had highways and a way for people to individually commute, we started sprawling out, buying this land further away from civilization centers to have more land, more luxurious. So especially if you have an FTL situation of like Stargates, right? Where you can just walk through a Stargate and be instantly teleported. Yeah, you might end up having suburb planets to main civilization hubs. So, you might have a situation where you have like Coruscant from Star Wars being this huge ecomonopolis city planet that has just full of Stargates, and a bunch of people decide to live off on like suburb worlds that are just, could you just imagine just a world of suburbs?
And that's the only situation that I see where it would be possible for a government entity or a higher entity to have control over multiple planets.
I agree. I think in anything other than the situation where you have fast, cheap FTL, it's pretty much impossible to have a centralized government overseeing all of these worlds. Maybe in some situations where you have slightly more expensive and slow FTL, you could have almost like a federation of worlds that have shared values, shared laws, and maybe some type of shared governance that's almost more like the UN with the member countries being member worlds if you have slightly slower FTL. But yeah, I fully agree with you. And unless you have cheap, instantaneous FTL, centralized government doesn't really work.
Yeah, no, it's like the difference between crossing the ocean from England to the Americas and trying to set up your country over there. It didn't work. But when you have a full landmass like the Americas settling the West, it does.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's faster, more tangible, and easier to connect with that governing entity.
Yeah.
But it is really interesting to think if that comes up, it would be like how they say the final frontier. You get this opportunity to expand out and settle a unhospitable world, but it's very dense and some kind of wanted resource. And they're like, well, if you go out there and you start a civilization and you build a company, you can have the land for free.
That is an interesting point you bring up, though, which is resource extraction, because in our last episode, we were talking about how you would not ever send resources from a distant solar system to Earth because it just doesn't make sense. It's too energy expensive and the payoff isn't there. That still holds true, I think, for a lot of FTL situations.
Yeah.
But not all of them, because again, if you have Stargates or even if you have like warp drives, but it's really cheap, it might now start to make sense to go to these other solar systems, these other worlds, and harvest resources and bring them back to Earth.
Yeah.
Or whatever other civilization. It doesn't have to be Earth per se, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, especially if it's an incredibly rare or an even undiscovered element that we have here.
What even is the concept of rare when you have an entire galaxy's worth? Like nothing is rare at that point.
I suppose that is true, but it's like you're saying it could still be expensive to move things. So perhaps you can travel to the speed of light and mine an entire asteroid filled with gold and supply an entire quadrant, all the gold that they could ever want. But perhaps all the way on the other side of the Milky Way, they don't really have that.
Yeah, I don't know. On a galaxy scale, it's going to be fairly evenly distributed.
Yeah, I mean, it should be, but there are outliers.
Of course.
It is a good point, though. There are a lot of things that are not going to be rare anymore. Like diamonds will be plentiful. It's just compressed carbon. And with carbon being one of the most abundant elements in the universe, then, it probably won't be an issue of finding them. But perhaps we find a new super heavy element that only exists in this special part of the galaxy. It's just interesting to think about. It's all hypothetical and speculative, but
so I think if you have fast and cheap FTL, I do think you live now in a post-scarcity society. I don't see a situation where you have fast, cheap FTL and you're wanting for literally anything. I mean, you have the ability to go get anything and bring it anywhere.
Right. And that is the logical way that would be, but we never see it really depicted like that in science fiction. I mean, we do sometimes, but in the
Star
big
Trek
ones,
is post-scarcity.
Yeah, Star Trek is, but then you look at Star Wars, right?
Yeah, well.
and then that's a very scarcity, right? People live in hardship still.
To be fair, and I love Star Wars, so don't get angry, but not really what you're going to want to look for scientific accuracy or a lack of plot holes.
Of course, but it is my preferred of the two.
Yeah, but I do stand by it. I think if you have fast, cheap FTL, you live in a post-scarcity society at that point.
Oh, I agree. It's just fun to think of it in other ways as well.
But that doesn't have to be the case. If FTL is more expensive, you can still have civilizations that are not just swimming in resources.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if we look at the opposite end of the spectrum, imagine a situation where you still have faster than light travel, but it's very expensive. So you're not going to want to transport resources back and forth between solar systems. Perhaps that's cost prohibitive. So in this situation, not only do you no longer have a post-scarcity society, but I don't think you have centralized government at this point. You might have, like I said before, a UN situation of a broader code of law that all these worlds follow, but not to the level that we all have an emperor that oversees multiple worlds.
Yeah.
And also, a lot of these planets might end up being self-sufficient. I think in the fast, cheap FTL example, I would imagine a lot of worlds would specialize. You might have entire solar systems that are like mining towns.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's not any ideal planets for habitation, but it ends up having an abundance of easily accessible minerals. So you have a mining town.
Yeah, because all those other resources could just be brought in.
Yeah.
You would need.
But I don't think you're going to have that situation if FTL is either too expensive to be commonly done or if it's too slow, right? Because if you have, like I said, 2 times the speed of light or 5 times the speed of light, it's still, you're looking at multi-year trips.
It definitely all depends on how fast you can get there. I absolutely agree with that.
And how expensive.
And how expensive it is, right?
Talking about how fast and how expensive it is, changing how your civilization develops, it can also change how you approach problems. One of the most famous FTL situations we have is something like a Stargate or like a wormhole. And if you have this technology specifically, that opens up so many doors because, like I said, you can live on one world and work on another, right? If you have this instantaneous portal. But doing things like terraforming becomes so easy if you have Stargates. I mean, imagine a situation where you have a Mars-like planet and a Venus-like planet. If you just put a Stargate on Venus and another one on Mars, you can transfer Venus's atmosphere to Mars. Or maybe you have a water world that has too much water and you have a desert planet like Mars that needs water. Just throw a Stargate in the ocean, let it drain that ocean as much as you need. And once it's done, you break the connection and now you have 2 much more habitable planets.
That is true. I mean, we could go even bigger. We could make a Stargate and then just suck the whole planet through, put it in a better zone around the star, and then just let it hang out there until it becomes a better candidate for terraforming.
That's crazy. You know, if you do have that level of Stargates where you can move planets, you might consolidate your entire empire. Every time you find an ideal planet, you might just suck it up to your solar system and keep them together, right?
I mean, you can. You have to make the predictions, of course, on how gravity is going to affect those. But
I'm willing to bet if you have world teleporting technology, you can probably handle some Newtonian physics calculations.
That is very true. It's just so crazy to think about. But when we talk about FTL, it's just everything is just so obtruse.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the thing is, who says that you can only go 10 times the speed of light, 100 times the speed of light? Who says that a Stargate can't transfer an entire planet? It's such a crazy topic anyways. I think go as crazy as you want with it. It's truly just imagination.
Yeah. No, it is awesome to think about. Now, of course, so just as time scales up, as we go faster than the speed of light, everything scales up. Our population, our economies, our government span over things. But so will conflicts, right? So as we scale that up, what is conflict going to look like? Because not everybody's going to play nice. They never will. Even in a world without scarcity, you might even argue that it would create even more issue because people become bored. And what is the only thing that you can really chase after in a world that already has everything? It's power.
That's an interesting point. I never really thought of that.
Yeah. So what does a war with faster than light travel look like? I know that we've covered how space warfare will happen in a previous episode, but that's all using what we know of physics now. But if you can just open up a gate or travel through a portal and not even yourself to just send armaments through, how does that shape the future of civilization then?
Well, this is a reoccurring theme for this episode, but of course that depends wholly on what type of FTL you have. So, you know, if you have something like Star Wars hyperspace system, they have set direct hyperspace lanes. And so in a war type situation, you can actually blockade those hyperspace lanes and prevent the enemy from entering your system. Whereas if you have something like a warp drive, your enemy can come from any direction. And not only can they come from any direction, but presumably there's no way for you to know that they're coming until they show up because they're moving faster than light, right?
Yeah, they're moving faster than that information that you would have been able to pick up of them coming would have been able to get to you.
So in that situation, Your enemy could just show up at any time, at any point with their warships, their armada, and take you on. And one of the biggest things with battle is logistics. I think for the modern US military, and God, I'm going to get this number wrong, I think it's roughly 20-1. I think for every soldier you have on the front line fighting, you've got about 19 logistics soldiers behind them, just making sure they've got ammo, fuel, food, water. So if you have FTL travel, the logistics gets a lot easier, and wars really are won by logistics.
Yeah.
And then the third option is Stargates. Do you know how absolutely crazy warfare is if you have Stargates?
I don't know.
What if I put a Stargate on your home planet and put the other one in the core of a star?
Oh my God. Oh, I mean, that's not even war anymore. That's just actually playing God.
Yeah, I mean, with Stargates, the amount of destruction you can cause is unreal. I mean, like I said, put one on your planet, open up another one in the core of a star.
And just essentially setting off the largest nuclear bomb ever to be recorded on a planet's surface.
God knows what happens if you throw the Stargate through a black hole while it's on your planet.
just the planet's there, and then it's just
does the other end of the Stargate just turn into another black hole? Or
just gone.
Or what if I take two Stargates? You've played Portal, right? Yeah. So what if you put one above the other one, drop some mass in it, let it fall to relativistic speed, and then open the Stargate up in front of someone's spaceship?
Yeah, and then you just release an infinitely moving projectile.
Yeah. Warfare with these types of systems is just absolutely mind-bogglingly insane. And I mean, even the warp drive scenario, that's also terrifying because the implications to having unlimited energy, which is what you basically need to make these work anyways, that still just gives you a huge amount of destructive potential. And you don't have an early warning system when your opponent can move faster than any possible message can move. I wonder if it would be a situation almost like the MAD doctrine we had with nuclear warfare here on Earth. Maybe it's a case of there's nothing you can do to defend against an opponent in an interstellar FTL war, but there's nothing they can do to defend against you. So you just have this mutually assured destruction situation.
Yeah, it's almost like the dark forest theory looping back around, except it's just our civilizations. Whoever strikes first wins, so therefore nobody should strike.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very real possibility that could happen.
Maybe FTL also does just serve as world peace.
Universe peace.
Universe peace.
Speaking of the dark forest theory, actually, I'm glad you brought that up because I also wanted to talk to you about the implications of FTL for the Fermi paradox.
Okay.
We've had episodes on the Fermi paradox, and one of the easiest explanations for where are all the aliens is that light is slow. There could be several alien civilizations in our galaxy that we never see and we never think of. I think it's a little trickier in an FTL situation, right? I mean, if you could potentially travel instantaneously across the universe or the galaxy, or even just high fractions of the speed of light, it just expands the bubble of possible worlds that life can form on that you can communicate with you.
Yeah.
And it means, okay, why can't we see aliens, right? Now, my answer to this is probably just that FTL is impossible, but it is an interesting point is that in an FTL capable universe, the Fermi paradox becomes a lot bigger of a question.
I mean, if you can travel to anywhere instantaneously, then you would have to assume that we would meet somebody out there or that they would have already met us by now. It just becomes more of a paradox, right? Yeah, because if it did exist, then it would have happened already.
You would expect to see aliens everywhere, right?
Yeah, just like absolutely everywhere. Because just like we said, if you could be anywhere that you want to be, why not?
And one of my favorite explanations for the Fermi paradox is the great filters theory, that life is just pretty rare and you might only have life occurring once or twice in a galaxy. And you can scale that up and say, okay, FTL is possible. Maybe life is even rarer than that. And it only happens once or twice in a galaxy cluster. But it just, at a certain point, it feels like you're just really saying life is so rare that intelligent space-faring species are only coming up once in a trillion stars. That just, to me, the math there is starting to not add up.
Yeah.
And this is why, again, this is for me is further proof that FTL isn't possible and never will be possible. So I think a faster than light universe brings the Fermi paradox to the next level. I mean, it's even more of a paradox, like you said. It's much more concerning, and the solution for that's going to be on a much larger scale.
Yeah. Like we're the only ones in our galaxy.
Yeah, well, that may be, but it might not even be that. We might be the only ones in our local cluster, or we might be the only ones in our observable universe.
Yeah.
But the observable universe doesn't even matter all that much when you have FTL, because the observable universe is based on our own light cone, how far away we can see. And if you go faster in light, you can go to the edge of your observable universe, so you can pass it.
Yeah, and just see more and more. Of course, assuming that it's infinite.
Yeah. Well, we don't know what it's going to be. But yeah, I don't know about you, Lucas, but I think that's really all I have to say about faster than light travel.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say and not a lot at the same time. It's just a lot of stuff that can be done with faster than light travel, but it is such a cool topic to think about. So I'm glad that we touched on it.
It really is a cool topic. It's fun to talk about. It's popular in science fiction. I hope we did it justice. It's a really tricky one to talk about because it's all hypotheticals. You can go anywhere with it, right? From barely having it to an extreme measure. But I think, hopefully made an interesting episode out of it.
Yeah, I hope so as well. But, we'll let you guys decide that.
Yeah, I hope you all liked the discussion. As always, please consider following us on Threads to see our daily post and support us on Patreon if you feel like doing that. If not, that's totally okay. Mm-hmm. We have our author spotlight coming on at the end. And thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you all so much. And we'll see you next time.
13 seconds. It takes 13 seconds for my signal to transmit. Light speed enabled thanks to quantized bits. Propagating pathways through the interplanetary mesh. When I hit the other end, I'm put back into messy flesh. While I'm a streak of photons, my body isn't really there. I journey through the universe with my senses fully bare. I resonate with Saturn's ring. I ride Jupiter's waves. I tune myself according to our sunlight's golden laser rays. I'd call it an eternity if it happened any faster. While I'm in it, hard to say what comes before or after. I'd call it just an instant if it didn't end so quick. Gray matter's not intended for fast thoughts to stick. I head out to the broadcast station when I want to really stretch and get out past the atmosphere so I can finally catch my breath. In between the planets, I can manage to appear all right, because I shed all of my shadows, shining as coherent light. ComplicatedReality.com